What's up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of Chasing Tech. And in today's episode, we'll be talking about 3 ways that quantum computing will change the future of health forever. Now, if you're new to the channel, welcome. My name's Chase. And on this channel, we talk about how new technologies impact the future of health, relationships, business, and so much more. If you'd like to stay up to date, make sure to hit the subscribe button below. So in today's video, we'll be talking about what quantum computing actually is, what it means for healthcare, specifically 3 ways that quantum computing will change healthcare forever, and then lastly, some of the challenges that are going to come along with quantum computing in privacy and security. So what is quantum computing? Well, let's just think about a normal computer today. A normal computer today uses ones and zeros to operate, which are bits of information. And the way a quantum computer is different is instead of using ones and zeros, they instead use qubits, which are, as I would like to think, more dense bits of information, which allows them to solve much more complicated problems in the same amount of time that a normal computer would. So when we think about the use case for quantum computing, I see it as the hardware that will be used to run AI and machine learning algorithms, much like how a Windows software would be used to run on a Dell hardware computer back in the 2000s when, computers were kind of starting to take off. So as more data is becoming available, the more and more data we build up, the more and more important quantum computers will be because they are much more efficient at solving problems given a large set of data. And IBM wrote a really good article that we'll be diving into in today's video. And at the very start, they said something really interesting. And they said, healthcare data is growing at a compound annual growth rate of 36%. And they say a whole bunch of other things about how healthcare is being improved with all this data. But they say, despite that, accounting for the exponential possibilities from this diversity of new data, it's stretching the capabilities of classical computing systems. So they're basically saying that today's computers, if we were to keep improving those computers, they're not going to possibly be able to keep up with the amount of data that we're creating. So a new system is needed. And that's where quantum computing enters the equation. And a really good quote or example of how much faster quantum computers are at using data to solve problems is from this website called CIOinsight.com. They said quantum computers are far faster and more powerful than traditional machines. In a 2019 demonstration, a quantum computer solved a problem in 3.5 minutes that would take a classic computer millennia. So the key point I want you to take away here is that quantum computers solve very different problems that involve a lot of data, and they will fill that role in the computing industry as a way to solve these complex problems, and think of it as a new tool in a tool belt and not as a replacement for today's current technologies in computing. This will be added as yet another type of computer to use when solving problems. But if we do end up having quantum computers in our pockets 100 years from now, I think that'd be pretty cool as well. But the way I like to think of quantum computers, whether it's right or wrong, an analogy I guess I would offer or suggest is it's like a simulator. So you feed a quantum computer all this information, massive amounts of information, assuming that that information is available, and it uses that information to simulate what would happen if you introduce new variables into the equation. So what if you insert a new drug or treatment into someone's body? Well, it uses a bunch of data points that maybe simulate what that person's body would do when they're treated for whatever illness that they might have. And Angela Wilkins wrote a really good article on this topic as well. She's an executive director at Rice's Ken Kennedy Institute. She wrote that quantum computing could help us develop new drugs by allowing researchers to simulate larger, more complex molecules. And she said that a quantum-enabled approach to drug development could make the process both cheaper and quicker. This could change the face of personalized medicine, giving us the ability to rapidly develop drugs to treat uncommon illnesses that don't currently receive the attention in the pharmaceutical industry. So what she's saying is very key. The pharmaceutical industry has to think in a broader market perspective. What markets are going to allow them to have a sustainable business model that they can serve for a period of time? these very specialized illnesses, unfortunately, it's harder for them to justify going through all the work and effort to develop a treatment for them. So the ability to use a quantum computer and solve these problems in a shorter period of time makes it more feasible for a pharmaceutical company to come up with a solution to very specific types of illnesses. So I think this is really cool, and it's going to change the way that we perceive very rare illnesses and help everyone feel like there's actually a possible solution out there, even if they might be a rare exception to the general population. So across the entire quantum computing industry, there are 5 key players that I've seen so far, and I'm sure these will change quite a bit as quantum computing progresses in its journey of development. But the key players I see are IBM, QCI, Xanadu, Microsoft Azure Quantum, and D-Wave Systems. And in today's video, we'll be talking about some of the use cases that IBM highlights for healthcare. A lot of the players in the quantum computing game don't necessarily focus on healthcare, but IBM has a really cool article about how quantum computing can be used in healthcare, and we're going to be using a lot of that for today's video. One of the ways that they explained the quantum computing use cases was with what I would call a flywheel. So when you think of a flywheel, it gets better and better the more various factors are introduced into the equation. So when we think about healthcare, there's diagnosing patients. Well, quantum computing can help with diagnostic assistance. When we think about medication, well, quantum computing can help with precision medicine. And when we think about health insurance and premiums, well, quantum computing can also help with optimizing premiums and pricing in healthcare plans. Their point is that as each of these are improved, they build on each other and they make this flywheel effect of exponentially improving healthcare for everyone. So let's talk about improved diagnosis. One of the things IBM highlighted was that through quantum computing, care providers may be able to improve diagnosis while simultaneously eliminating the need for repetitive, invasive diagnostic testing. So no need to have regular testing. They might be able to simulate what is happening in your body without the need to test you regularly. They don't then go on to continue saying, they may be able to continuously monitor and analyze the health of individuals. In addition to helping patients, health plans, and providers could also benefit from reduced treatment costs as a result of earlier diagnoses. It might even become possible to carry out meta-analysis for more elaborate diagnostic procedures in order to determine which procedure should be carried out and when. This could help further cut costs and enable more data-driven decisions by health plans and government for providers and individuals. So really what this means is that the ability for a quantum computer to take all the data collected from an interaction with a patient is going to be further utilized to create a very specific diagnosis that will allow a more specific medication or solution to treat that illness, which makes medications more effective and perhaps reduces the amount of time spent trying to solve an illness or the amount of medication used to solve an illness. It's very precise, almost like an arrow hitting a bullseye on a board, and that is going to result in what I think are going to be reduced costs. Another really interesting insight from IBM's article. Another important lever through which quantum computing may support pricing decisions is enhanced fraud detection. Currently, healthcare fraud costs hundreds of billions of dollars in the US alone. Classical data mining techniques already help with detecting and reducing healthcare fraud. However, more computationally efficient methods are needed. Quantum algorithms could enable superior classification and pattern detection and thus help uncover anomalous behavior and eliminate fraudulent medical claims. This is expected to allow health plans to further optimize pricing strategies and offer reduced premiums as a result of having lower costs associated with fraud loss and prevention schemes. So the way we can think of this is a quantum computer is basically going to use algorithms to analyze all of the activity in real time as it's happening. And it's going to find people who are doing fraudulent healthcare claims and eliminate those from the pie per se of the total cost of providing healthcare. And what this means is that the total entire pie that everyone is being charged to have a healthcare insurance plan, it gets cut down drastically, and there's no longer that entire pie, and everyone gets to pay a much smaller fee. Another key area where quantum computing is going to affect the future of health is with more effective medicine. So another thing that IBM says in their article is that one avenue in this endeavor, which is knowing how to effectively medically intervene for any given individual, is the study of drug sensitivity at the cellular level. For example, by taking into account the genomic features of cancer cells and the chemical properties of drugs, models that predict the effectiveness of cancer drugs at a granular level are already being investigated. Quantum-enhanced machine learning could support further breakthroughs in this area and ultimately enable causal inference models for drugs. What is a causal inference model? I had to look it up. It's basically like a simulation. And that's why I said that quantum computers are basically like simulators, because this allows a scenario to be modeled out and determine how a drug is impacting somebody's body on a very specific detailed level. And it's very personalized to that individual as opposed to a broad audience. So what this means is that a quantum computer can simulate all of the ways that different factors introduced into your body are going to change the future state of your health, almost like a crystal ball of sorts that can use a very specific application in changing your health. When we think about how healthcare is done today, a lot of treatments are umbrella-like. I mentioned this with the pharmaceuticals, right? They have to go after a broad audience. And another factor of this as well is with the diagnosis of medical conditions. So when we think about medical conditions today, doctors have to diagnose them with symptoms that the patient reveals themselves, which are not necessarily as accurate as maybe some hard readings on the body's peripherals. So doctors have to use tests to come up with these peripherals, but again, they're only in that specific instance, as opposed to a longer period of time building up to that point in time where the patient is experiencing those symptoms. So as a result, the patient comes to the doctor and they have these symptoms, and the doctor says, well, I think you have this. And it's putting them in this umbrella, which leads to an umbrella treatment that is not necessarily spot on target. Now, if we think about how quantum computing enhances this process, we continue to have these conversations between doctors and patients. We continue to have these tests, but what about smartwatches that are collecting regular data from that patient, or possible tests that can be used to gather data and then simulated and use these tests over time to create a good model of maybe what's happening inside that person's body? These can be used to create more precise treatment that lead to more effective results. So I don't really see a lot of what's been done historically going away. I just see it being further enhanced with some of the new capabilities that'll be available using quantum computing. And then lastly, there are going to be challenges with privacy and security in healthcare. Anywhere where there is data, there is chances of hacking and data privacy issues. And this is something that IBM acknowledged in their article as well. They said, a century after the birth of quantum mechanics, it has been proven that quantum computing can have an advantage over classical approaches. Quantum computing does not merely provide an incremental speedup, it is the only known technology that can be exponentially faster than classical computers for certain tasks, potentially reducing calculation times from years to minutes. So it's acknowledging all these great things that quantum computing can do. But then they say, quantum computing necessitates a different way of thinking and a new and highly sought after set of skills, distinct IT architectures, and novel corporate strategies. This technology also has immediate implications for security. Security is an area of particular relevance for healthcare, given the sector's data privacy responsibilities and challenges. So if we think about how quantum computers are used, they have to be used very carefully, because healthcare is a very personal area in our lives. The data that can be used to make these computations might be able to change somebody's life in a good way, but it's also very private data that has to be kept held in a secure way. And ironically, quantum computing actually might be the answer for enhancing security over healthcare data as well. Xanadu, which is one of the quantum computing companies I mentioned earlier in the video, actually has a rare or a new way of offering quantum computing. They're a Canadian-based startup, and what I thought was really interesting is that this startup gained $45 million in funding and attention from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, also known as DARPA. And if you know DARPA, it has a lot to do with security and privacy, right? Hence Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So when I think about what this means, I can see agencies like DARPA investing attention and possibly even money into quantum computing because they see it as a way to enhance security. So ironically, I think that quantum computing might actually be the way to simulate what possible hacks might come and attack healthcare data, and therefore provide a better cybersecurity solution as a result. So kind of to wrap things up, there was three main ways that healthcare is going to be impacted by quantum computing. There's more precise diagnoses that are not as broad and umbrella-like, which leads to more precise treatments that maybe don't have certain side effects that someone doesn't want and can truly attack the illness that that person's experiencing. And then lastly, these things can lead to lower costs, but also quantum computing can help detect fraud and eliminate some of that cost from the pie. Now, all these things together are great, but we still have got some time before these things arrive, and it'll probably be about 5 to 10 years before we start seeing more breakthroughs in this area related to healthcare. That being said, it's good to understand this stuff so we can start being prepared for the future. Thanks for watching.